We're next door neighbors in Portland, Oregon. I had heard of Larry as Larry Crane in 2003 when we were next door neighbors in Portland, Oregon. I had heard of Larry as he was prolific on the Portland music scene. Any band or artist that you have heard of that is from Portland, Larry has probably worked with them. Stephen Malkmus, Cat Power, Sleater Kinney, The Joggers, The Decemberists, Jenny Lewis, M. Ward, The Go-Betweens, Death Cab for Cutie, and Elliott Smith, whom he was a friend and collaborator of. He also founded the great recording magazine Tape Op and Jackpot Recording Studios, and he has courses on LinkedIn Learning about recording. I hope you enjoy this conversation.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for doing this.
Do
So
my
you're
hair.
at your studio. Yeah,
My stylist wasn't here today.
Oh man, did you not? Did
trying
they not get the memo about that?
I have a whole team, makeup, hair.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm at let's see. There's better pictures there. I'm at Jackpot right now, and there's
And where is Jackpot now? Because I know you've been in some different locations.
For oh my gosh, for 10 years, 97 to 2007, we were at 20th and Morrison.
I remember that.
And so that was the old space that was a funky cinder block building. And then since then, the last 15 years, we've been in this space here at 50th and Division in Southeast Portland. Yeah.
Southeast. Okay, nice. And that's a bustling area now.
It's nuts. It's totally nuts. It used to be, sorry, feel a little isolated there. It used to be pretty quiet over here, and now there's like a upscale grocery store across the street and food carts and tons of condos and apartments or something.
I remember right
different.
before I moved away from Portland in 2016, it exploded, and used to be there were houses on Division and all that, and
yeah. They kicked out all the junkies. It's terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been here since 1993. I've lived here, and then I used to come up here since like 87 on tour and stuff. And so it just, I've seen it change a lot. And if there's one thing I've learned, you just got to roll with it and just kind of go, well, what are the good things,
Absolutely.
There's better food. There's more microbreweries. That's cool. There's very good coffee.
Yeah. And there's been good coffee for a while. So are you from the Bay Area originally?
Yeah, I was born in Berkeley, actually,
in
the 60s. That sounds radical, right? And, I lived in Oakland a little bit when I was a little kid. And then I lived in this area called Nevada City, it's kind of gold rush country up in the foothills going towards Tahoe, near Sacramento, kind of, but up in the foothills. I grew up there mostly, second grade through high school. And then I went to college in Chico, California, which is a
big party school, right?
A famous party school. Okay. If my parents had known that, I probably would have gone somewhere else, But I went there and I was studying film, and then I kind of started I was doing music stuff. I was home recording and doing weird music. Actually, some of that just came out recently.
What's it called?
Craniostomy. And there's 2 volumes, 1 and 2, that my friend has a label in the Bay Area. He's put those out. Old recordings.
And then as far as bands back then, were they sort of punk-ish?
Well, I was mostly in a band called Vomit Launch, but despite the name, we weren't really all that punky. But we did play with like Dead Kennedys and Replacements and Mudhoney, Nirvana, No Means No. Oh my gosh, all kinds of bands.
So you all got signed and had management and that sort of thing, or
eventually? I think I was the manager, but
name or same name?
Nobody said I was the manager, but I did all the work. I don't know. I mean, it was kind of a given. I was the one in the band that already had like a cassette label and was putting out tapes and dealing with recording and all that stuff. So it was kind of like, yeah, I wasn't like a recording engineer. I wouldn't call myself back then, but I was learning stuff and I made all our demos and did odds and ends. And but
Uh,
yeah, so managing the band, but we did the first two records, actually got them, pressed and put out ourselves. We
and so they're
self-financed.
actual records, it sounds like.
Oh yeah, vinyl. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
Like we went to George Horn and he mastered it at Fantasy, and we recorded with a friend of ours, Greg Freeman, who used to be in a band called Pell Mell back then. He was in The Call as well. Remember The Call? Na
I don't.
na 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 na. And the walls came down. They had an MTV hit. It was crazy.
Uh,
So Greg was a really good friend, and he surprisingly features in the first issue of Tape Op. Um,
uh,
but uh, but yeah, I was. We recorded. We self-released those records, and then a label signed us, and the guy who ran that label was John Bacigalupi, who is now my partner in Tape Op magazine. So
huh.
if that makes a lot of kind of sort of all flows
Sort of like
along
a
like
full
this.
circle sort of thing to
What?
was it a full circle sort of thing to eventually work with him?
Yeah, I mean, that's a crazy thing because he had a studio initially in his house, but a 16-track studio, and
Mhm.
he had a label called Mad Rover, and they were looking for bands, and they had a P&D deal with some company that's long gone,
Uh-huh,
but the company said, "Look for some punk bands, maybe some girl bands or something," and we had a female guitarist and a female
uh-huh.
singer,
Oh, okay.
um,
I'm at
and
launch did.
yeah, yeah, and I was the bass player, and then we had an English guy on drums,
Uh-huh.
and so, they signed us up, and we had kind of unlimited this is the curse to give a musician, is to say, "Okay, you're on our label, and we have our own basically our own in-house studio,
Mhm.
so we'll take as much time as we need."
How do you make
So
choices? How do you ever decide what you're gonna do?
well, it was on a plan. It was you know what, the great thing that I learned from John was, like, get things done, John was the producer, Bacigalupi, and engineer, and it was never, like, wasted time,
Uh-huh.
it wasn't like
He was
we're
good
gonna.
about saying, "Okay, that's good, time to move on," that sort of
Oh,
thing.
yeah, and I was a taskmaster too, like, as far as how I I hesitate to say I ran the band, but I kinda ran the band,
Uh-huh.
even though we collaboratively wrote the songs and music, the singer wrote the lyrics, Lindsay and I, the guitarist and I wrote the music, the drummer and all of us arranged it. We
Mhm.
really we jammed ideas out, we built the songs up, so it was very democratic, kinda like the way U2 works or something,
Mhm.
honestly. It didn't sound like that,
Yeah.
but, then but in the studio, I would be like I would be like, okay, I would make the demos and I would be like, okay, here's the arrangements and here's the overdub ideas. So there was always a plan to get things done. It wasn't like, we're going to the studio and just partying or
Yeah, yeah. And so and
yeah.
so and so early on, you were making recordings on your own. Was that, like, reel to reel, like tape, or what was that? What were you
It's
thinking about?
yeah, a cassette tape. It was in the years before cassette 4 tracks
So
existed.
before, like, the Tascam Porta
Yeah,
Studio.
yeah, years
Uh-huh,
before, that stuff didn't exist. I knew there were reel-to-reel 4 tracks like the TX and, 3340s and stuff. I'd seen those, I wanted one, but they
mhm,
were so expensive, and I was like a high school kid and then, like, early college years. I didn't have any money, so I'd borrow my dad's home stereo stuff. I don't think they ever had a cassette deck in the living room anymore. I'd
uh-huh,
borrow his tape deck, I bought my own tape deck. I would use home stereo equipment to monitor through. I bought like a Radio Shack used to sell a little mixing board that it was a 4-channel mixer that, ran on a 9-volt battery,
oh, wow.
and you could mix, like, 2 stereo things together,
Uh-huh.
and you could do, reduction overdubs, like play off of one tape deck and record to the other one and add something.
So you're going
So
back and forth, like,
yeah,
and every time
yeah.
you're doing that, you're having to re-record the other parts, is that right?
Yeah, just it's blend a reduction, blend down mix where you're adding something. You
Uh-huh.
know, there's no going back, but you could go back and do it again. You could,
Yeah, yeah.
keep, um, and you just keep going tape to tape. It adds up. The hiss, the sound gets worse. The hiss
Uh-huh.
builds up.
Oh,
But
that
if you,
sounds like what a great way to learn to just I mean, just to do it yourself like that.
the things I know. No,
Well,
seriously. I mean, I took electronics courses in high school, and we built synthesizer boxes and stuff.
uh-huh.
And it was a really strangely enough, like, They
So
had all these,
what years are we talking about?
79 to 82, that
Uh-huh.
kinda era. They had all these like, kits you could buy an IC and be like, "Oh, hook it up this way, and it'll make a synthesizer module," and it was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
20 bucks.
I
And
remember I remember them I had a neighbor who was more into it than I was, but them having, those different electronic boxes where you could route things in different ways, and it was kind of teaching you about electronics, and I
oh,
think
yeah, with the
for
little springs, clips, and the
yeah, yeah,
wires. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I had
So
one of those, but that was too basic for me. I got
uh-huh,
deep into soldering irons. I was etching my own circuit boards in the
uh-huh.
driveway.
So you didn't necessarily realize that engineering and producing all those things could be something that you would do, but I'm curious, like, what are some maybe some personality traits or qualities that you notice or that maybe you had or that people have that would draw them to that sort of career?
I think I tried to figure out what's wrong with me, so I think about it a lot. So, I think the number one thing is being a pretty obsessive music fan,
Mhm.
at least the number one way to do this right, because I don't know how you could come in here and sit behind a console and make any judgments if you haven't heard a lot of music,
Uh-huh.
like lots of it, and seen bands live and know the difference between a record and a live show and understanding all that stuff. But I look back, and this is crazy, but I look back and I think about when I was 16 and I'd be listening to something and I'd be like, why did they make this choice? I knew
Mhm.
there were choices involved. My mom was an artist and my dad
Visual?
was really
Uh-huh.
practical. My mom did ceramics and stuff.
Mhm.
And so, but she was also a commercial artist. She sold her stuff. So I always saw this thing of like, I knew there were people behind something creating it and there were all the choices. And so I think that was I would listen to records and I'd be like, I became a huge Pink Floyd fan because I was 16 and The Wall came out. Like,
Uh-huh.
holy but Jesus, that's a record, right?
Yeah.
And that's a work, and it's like you have to decode it kind of. What is the story of the album? You have to figure it
And
out.
were you watching the film as well, the
That
movie?
was years later.
Oh, it
It
was,
was
okay.
it was, honestly, the timeline is like 3 or 4 years later that film
Uh,
came out. It's
okay,
it's
I didn't
so
realize.
yeah, it was such a different.
The Wall was my first, music purchase on well, maybe but, tape. I had The Wall on tape. I just went to a record store, after my bar mitzvah, I had a gift certificate and
And
for a few and said, "What's good?" I'm 13 years old, and they
yeah.
gave me The Wall, REM Reckoning, I think, and
Oh, beautiful.
Violent Femmes. I think those were the 3.
The
Yeah.
first Violent Femmes record. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
those are all favorites of mine, so
Ah,
perfect stuff.
I was pointed in a good direction, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I that record really blew my mind, but then I would listen to Animals, the album before that, and I didn't think it sounded as good.
Huh.
It was kinda
You the
murky.
quality of it?
Yeah, the recording quality
Uh-huh,
to me
yeah.
sounded duller, and they actually there's a this is the craziest thing is then, like, in a few months, they're reissuing, Animals in a new mix
Oh,
because Nick Mason's always said that, the drummer, he's always been like, "I hope we remix it. I hope we revisit it. I hope we remix it." And it
uh-huh,
turns out now I've learned that that was the first record they did at their own studio, Britannia Row, which
uh-huh,
they had set up right before after Wish You Were Here, before recording Animals, and they brought in Brian Humphreys, the same engineer, to work on that. And everything's fine, but it just doesn't it's kinda less fidelity to my ear than
mhm,
Wish You Were Here or The Wall.
uh-huh,
And and I learned the answer. You know what I mean?
uh-huh.
But that was always curious, like, why does it sound different? Why does it sound not quite as exciting to me
Yeah,
sonically?
yeah, yeah. I love
And
that
I would
album, You Were Here as well. That's beautiful.
yeah, "Wish You Were Here" sounds great. I mean, that's like, what?
Uh-huh.
So, those sort of thoughts, like, why do records sound the way they do, were always in my head, and especially being on an independent, kinda punkish scene in the early '80s. You'd people would make records in the cheapest scale they could, so you'd go buy some punk album, and it was really quickly recorded,
Mhm,
maybe poorly recorded, and you'd be like, "That's rough," because 'cause I'd put on a Wire record from England, and I'd be like, "That sounds amazing. That was done at Abbey Road." And then
mhm,
I'd put on, I'm not gonna point any fingers, but, something on SST or Discord or whatever maybe. Not always Discord because they had, Donzi and Tara doing a lot of that. But
Mm.
there'd be some records you'd buy and you'd be like, that just doesn't sound as good as the band does live, or as interesting, or as good as other records in that genre. And I would wonder why,
Mhm.
So
So
I
so so it sounds like love of music, passion for music, and then also
yeah,
curiosity of, like, how it was done, the
I
mystery.
think so. I mean, the best thing the hardest thing you learn is like you buy some record and you go, I like this, I'd like to emulate it, and then you find out you got your two cassette decks and a little Radio Shack mixer, and you can't
Uh-huh.
get there. And
Yeah.
so you wonder what's the difference between what I'm trying to do and how they made this record, and you just start. I would read, I've always been curious about that, so I would read about it. And I just never considered myself being like a technical engineer, the guy, turning all the knobs here and setting
Yeah.
microphone
Well, I was
levels.
wondering, like, how important do you think that is?
I still don't think it's that important.
So more like using your ear if, and I was just listening to another interview you did where you're talking about finding what works and not, you don't it's
Yeah.
a rabbit hole of constantly saying, "I need new gear." Where when you find something that works, where you can really, like you said, make records.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's finding out what is impeding you, kind of
Mhm,
relating back to what I just said, finding out like why you can't get the sound you want.
mhm,
And a lot of times, that's a deep journey because, say it's just a guitar sound. Well, you didn't just do your job because you might not have completed your job just because you put a 57 on the speaker of a mic amp or a guitar
yeah,
amp. That might not be enough, so you have to learn like, oh, well, what kind of guitar are they using? Oh, is it single coil and they need to turn on axis to the magnetic north so it doesn't buzz as much? And
uh,
and do we need to put, batteries in their stomp boxes instead of plugging them into the wall so there's less hum? And what's a ground loop? And oh, is their speaker broken? Is it falling apart? I've had every scenario has happened to me by now. But
yeah.
it's a deep journey. And it's like, well, what's the difference between a Strat and a Telecaster and a SG and a Les Paul? Like
I
there's
just wanna
huge.
interject really quickly is for people
Yeah,
who maybe aren't familiar. So those are different guitars, electric,
yeah, yeah,
and a 57 is a very commonly used microphone,
yeah.
very
The
versatile.
most the
Yeah,
most common, the one you
yeah,
think of when you think microphone, unless you're thinking the big silver things that look sort of like this.
uh-huh. Have you ever made an album just with a 57?
No, I'm sure I could. I mean,
Uh-huh,
I'm not
I
that
did too.
wouldn't phase me. I
Uh-huh.
don't like actually, I generally make albums without any 57s.
Okay,
I really I think they're fine, but I think they're just a little there's the coloration's a little hard for me. It's
okay.
it's
Well,
it's a
that's the
little too
thing I think with what
nasally.
you do is you're tuned differently. For me, I don't hear that the same way, like,
Yeah,
but I can understand that. When just like someone maybe who's not I'm a drummer, maybe someone who's not a drummer wouldn't notice the same things about the drums that I would notice because I'm tuned.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I mean, and that's something I had to learn horribly, like why do the drums sound bad? Well, first of all, it's
Mhm,
probably the drummer, but second of all, how are the heads? How are the drums tuned? What part of the room are they in? You
mhm.
know, uh,
How big is the room?
how big is the room? How high is the ceiling? How are they hitting them? What kind of sticks are they using? Are they wood or nylon tips? And there's so many factors. And I mean, some of the stuff that I've learned over the years is just so stupidly simple.
Mhm.
Like just throw a little moon gel on the snare if it's ringing,
Yeah, yeah.
or put a piece of, that egg crate foam inside of the kick drum shell if it's too resonant, just
Yeah.
just damp that a little, or even towels or whatever the heck. And then watch out for the front. If the front head's one with a hole cut in it and you're sticking a mic in there, is that resonating? And is it resonating at a good frequency? Or
Yeah,
should
yeah.
it, I'll put bricks and blankets against the front head to damp it on the outside, if I don't like it. So I'm tailoring for drums for me, I'm constantly just tailoring all the sounds of the kit to
You're
get
it
the
sounds and also
recording.
your nature of job is constantly problem solving, it sounds like.
Mhm. Boy, it sure is. I think so because, you know, how musicians sound and how they wanna sound are 2 different things sometimes.
Uh-huh.
And and also a lot of people just really can't, they really need guidance on how to wrap their head around studio recording, as opposed to just playing, like, wow, it sounded great in rehearsal. It's like, number one, that's probably your memory. Number two, if you did record it on one mic, like an iPhone, it's like, it's just it's just crunching it all up in a compressor, and it makes that sound kind of cool,
Mhm.
and we can do that here in a different way that's more refined. But yeah, sure, and it's just like, your memory of sound is so fleeting, like if you play someone like, here's a snare sound, and then you play the same sound to them like 10 minutes later and say, is this the same sound? They can't tell you,
Mhm.
not most people can. And if you tell them it's different and then you play the same thing again, they'll probably say, yeah, you're right, it's different. The
Uh-huh.
power of suggestion is huge, huge, you know,
Yeah. I'm gonna
confirmation
guess you
bias.
don't that you get your sound pretty quickly, that you don't spend, 5 days on a drum sound. Is that true?
Nobody's got the budget. Yeah. Sure. I mean, I've seen sessions that were really slow. I've worked on sessions that I've spent a day getting a band set up to record a
Mhm.
few times, but, you know, generally it's kind of like you just, there's a certain thing where, especially, I hate to pick on drums, but it's great because you're a drummer and you're a good
Yeah,
drummer.
I love it.
But there's a thing where the band, say you're recording a band or an artist brings in a drummer, and you set up the mics and the drummer sets up their kit, and you move the mics in and you start listening, and you have to figure out, as an engineer producer, you have to figure out, um how far can I push this person,
Uh-huh.
how good of a drummer are they, and how appropriate are they to the song? There's a million questions to ask at that point, and you have to figure out when you just have to let go, as I'll be like, "Oh my god," and I'll run in there and go, "What is your kick drum pattern?" You
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
And someone will go, "Well, I don't know, I kinda haven't really sorted it out." I'm like, "Yeah, I noticed."
Yeah.
Like, "Please define your kick drum part,"
Uh-huh.
because if someone's going to pip, bida boop, boom, 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 ba-da-da, like, it's just, it in the mix, it's gonna translate so different than how you could skirt by that on stage or something,
Uh-huh.
you know?
Yeah. So it could be coaching, and it sounds like you could be a psychologist at times as well.
Yeah. Oh, I think so.
Uh-huh. Because you want everyone to be comfortable and perform to their
Yeah.
best. That's, you know,
Yeah.
important, obviously. Um, so you've heard a ton of drummers and worked with a ton of drummers, and I'm guessing as you've gotten, your career has evolved, that you've gotten to work with better and better drummers. So what are some things you noticed? Like, what were some things that the what were some differences between the less experienced drummers and the more experienced drummers, especially in the studio?
I mean, having good equipment generally, like, a better the drummer, the more, I'm not saying that it even has to be that fancy of drums, but
Mhm.
equipment that's set up properly,
Uh-huh.
you
The setup
know?
probably meaning, like, ergonomically or just the way it sounds?
No, no, just when that drummer strikes that drum, it sounds really good.
Mhm. Yeah. In the
I've
room.
noticed that with, Janet Weiss from Sleat, used to play with Sleater Kinney and Quasi and all kinds of stuff. Always the drums just always sound the way she wants them to sound. They're tuned
Mhm.
up, they're in good shape. The way that she wants to hit them and the tones that she wants comes out of those drums. Matt Cameron, I've worked with him briefly, the same. I mean, instantly it just sounds solid, tight, amazing
Mhm.
on no matter what the mics are or anything. People, there's just the drummers that have their stuff together. I work with one guy, Paul Pulverenti, a lot. He used to play a little tour a bit with Elliott Smith. It's on
Mhm.
some of the recordings, just very a few, but he's a friend up here. If I have the choice and I'm hiring someone and I'm gonna maybe play bass on the session, like for
Mhm.
a songwriter, I'll hire Paulie, and he'll come in, and it doesn't I never feel like he's obsessing over his drums, or I mean, he must spend some time getting things, edges done and new heads and stuff. But he walks in, he sometimes just uses some of the kit that's here, and he always sounds fantastic.
Uh-huh.
There's just no doubt. So it's like that. I think so much it just comes from the player, but they also really. the really good ones really listen, you know,
Mhm.
and then come up with the really appropriate parts. And they're really great drummers, as you know, can do that on the fly and make
Mhm.
it sound like they've been in like this band. If it's just a, thrown together group of people, sound like they've been doing it for like 10 years,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
And
you
so you
know.
have it sounds like you have some go-to people.
Oh
I
yeah.
I was just talking to a friend here in Nashville who's a producer about that, and, I was saying there are some of the master sessions that I've been to, it seemed like there was like a core group who work
Mhm.
together a ton, so it's almost like they're a band, and they can look at
Yeah.
the chart and they when it's that type, a lot of the, they have the number system here. They'll
Yeah.
look at the chart and interpret it their way. It'll sound like them, and, like, I
Yeah.
remember one session where they listened one time, one guy charted it, they copied it up, and then they played the whole thing, and it didn't sound they sounded like a band playing it, they didn't sound
Yeah.
like,
And I
um
think that's people who've learned also how to play well in the studio, like, you
mm,
play less,
uh-huh,
Every musician would probably tell you that, like, unless you're instructed otherwise, you leave gaps, you leave put a you know, on the 3, put a big whole note on the bass and let the drum fill have some room and don't go like under the over the drum fill,
uh,
that everyone knows how to play to make it sound better,
uh-huh,
and if there's fills, it's very carefully placed,
yeah,
or they'll ask the producer, "Do you wanna fill on going into the 3rd chorus, or do you want me just to lay out there?" You know?
absolutely. And so you've been in Portland for a long time, and so, like, what if you could kind of bring us into the scene. I moved to Portland in '98. Oh, I'm frozen,
Mhm.
huh? Um,
Yeah. You've
you can
been
hear
here
me
stuck.
though, can't you?
Yeah, everything I hear you fine.
Okay, I may leave for a second, but I'm still listening.
Yeah, yeah.
If you could kind of paint a picture of the scene
From
in the early '90s.
in the early '90s. Man, the one of the reasons I moved to Portland was I kept coming up here on tour and there were these lots of places to play music. There were lots of venues and stuff. So I think that was really important. When I first moved to town, there were some places like La Luna and Satyricon that were running that were really, busy venues, and you saw a lot of great touring acts, and I thought that was really always, that contributed to something in the town where people wanted to start bands and stuff so that they could play those clubs and everything.
Uh-huh,
And, the thing that I really noticed back then in the early '90s when I moved here was, there were a few studios, and I have nothing bad to say about any of the studios that were here, but the ones that had pretty decent stuff were pretty expensive, if I recall right.
uh-huh,
I think mostly charging more than I charge now,
uh-huh,
and and then there were some cool funky ones like Mike Lastra still has a studio at his house, and a few places like that that were kind of smaller, but there really wasn't like sort of a mid-level studio that was sort of focused on, what you might call indie rock or local rock bands or, Americana, everything that I've certainly songwriter stuff. I mean, that's certainly been more our forte in some degree,
mhm.
although we've done, the Portland Cello Project I've worked with extensively and
I play with, Gideon from that group.
oh yeah, yeah, he's
Yeah,
fantastic. What a great writer.
yeah,
Yeah. So, that the the thing I saw was there wasn't like a studio like that, and so I kind of accidentally put together like initially like a 4-track reel-to-reel studio in my basement,
mhm,
and my friend Dewey Mahood gave me his uncle's 4-track Tascam TAC, whatever it was, and then I soon bought an 8-track reel-to-reel, and people were coming over and recording, and I was working with like Stephen Malkmus and bands coming through town that I knew from New York and
mhm.
Canada and New Zealand, and people would stay at my house and make records, or they'd come up from California and stay with me and make a record.
And
So
this was not a business at this point, or what?
no,
Were you
it's just my home. It was called Laundry Rules Recording because someone else, a previous tenant, had written laundry rules next to the washing machine, which was right behind me where I was sitting.
uh-huh,
um, but yeah, it was just kind of like a hobby, but I started getting better, and it's the same time I started tape op back then
uh-huh,
too.
And that was like
Um,
a zine at first, like, it there was
yeah.
no you were not necessarily thinking of or were you thinking of distributing it widely?
It was getting distributed widely from the get-go, actually. I
It
was
was.
sending it to labels and bands all over the country
Uh-huh,
and internationally. Just people I knew, there were, like and people at Matador Records in New York and Discord Records in DC and all the people that I knew and or liked and thought would get it, you know? So
mhm,
I'd send out a lot of copies, and I got it through Tower Records and Tower Books and all sorts of stuff like that. I knew people at Tower because I
uh-huh,
lived in California there. And I knew distribution too. I knew how that worked. I had a lot of friends that worked at record distributors and stuff,
uh-huh.
and I'd actually right around when I started Tape Op, I was working for a record distributor briefly
Oh, okay.
before the my commercial version of the studio Jackpot started.
Uh-huh. Have
Yeah.
your with so Tape Op is a great magazine, I love it. I discovered it in
Thanks.
Atlanta in I don't know, probably 12 years ago or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I realized that you could subscribe and all that, and that it
It's
was you
free.
in Portland.
It's free.
You know, I don't know if
It's
you remember, but we there yeah, it's
there.
free,
There it is. Yeah,
and
it's
it's
free.
great. I was just telling my friend yesterday, this producer, I was like, "You read Tape Op, right?" He's like, "Tape Op?" Like, "You need to read Tape Op." So anyway, so I'm sure I hope he subscribed. But,
Yeah.
so have you well, I was wondering, I don't know if you remember that we were neighbors for a really short time in Portland in probably like 2003.
Right.
Uh, yeah, and you gave me a tour of your studio, which was, I think at the time, the one on Morrison, the location on
Right. Right, right. Yeah. God,
Yeah.
that's right. I was trying to remember her backstory. I'm like, there's something it's all involved and yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
totally.
didn't live in that house very long. I was a renter with some people I didn't know, and then they
Yeah.
sold the house. It was that sort of situation. It was in that
Yeah.
kind of odd area, like, I think it was right by a police precinct or something like that.
Yeah.
Um
So I owned that was the first house I bought, and that was
Uh-huh,
on Everett Street,
Everett, that's right.
49th or 48th and Everett. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, right around there. And you were just right around the corner or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was next door.
Next
Um,
door? Man,
yeah,
that's funny. It's been so long.
yeah. It was a long time ago now. It was almost
Yeah.
20 years ago. But I mean, I had heard of you and knew of Jackpot. But back to kinda early Portland, and you probably get asked a lot about Elliott Smith, but I'm just curious, like, how did you originally meet, and what was it what impressed you about him? What do you notice about him?
I think I've never been able to figure out how we met.
Uh,
He was part of that whole scene. I knew all these other people in the local music scene, and when I first moved up here, I ended up working with John Moen, who is now the drummer for the Decemberists, but he leads a band called Eyelids, which
mhm,
also features the drummer Paul I was talking about.
uh-huh,
And, so I knew him and his bandmates, and then Satan's Pilgrims, the surf band, and just all these different people I started just sort of gravitating towards, hanging out with. And, I think I met Elliot because Heat Miser were a going concern then, his band,
uh-huh,
and, with Neil Gust and Tony Lash, and later, Sam Coombs on bass, and I knew Sam from he's also in the band Quasi, but I knew Sam from California. When we were making our first record in Vomit Launch, he was making his first record for a band he had called Donner Party,
mhm,
and at the same studio.
okay,
So his tapes were on the shelf, ours were on the shelf. We ended
uh-huh,
up playing shows together back then. When I moved to town, I went over to Sam and Janet Weiss's house and played bass with them, actually. Maybe it was a potential gonna be a band with us, but then they ended up doing a duo called Quasi.
uh-huh,
And, even one of the first recordings I did, I borrowed their equipment to record John Moen's band in my basement. Like, I didn't have an 8-track yet, so I borrowed Quasi's stuff. So when I met Elliot, he would already been playing with Sam, there was all these mutual friends, and
mhm,
also Joanna Balme, who he was dating at the time, who plays with Stephen Malcolmus
mhm,
these days. She was, I knew her fairly well because she worked with friends of mine at La Luna as
uh-huh.
bartenders, that worked there. So, it was always that kind of thing. It's a small scene.
Uh-huh.
you know, and,
Sounds
what
like a real there was a real community feel.
yeah, you'd go to a show and you'd see the same people, you know, you'd be like, "Oh, hey," and even if you never really met them or they were friends, you'd walk up to talk to one friend, you meet a new friend, you know?
Uh-huh.
It was very small compared to how it feels now, very
Uh-huh.
different.
And so you have been you're an archivist for the Elliott Smith estate, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah,
And
well,
so
Elliott helped me get Jackpot going.
okay.
He we met I recorded a little bit of him at my house just to help him because his console is broken, but
Mm,
we both had the same kinda 8-track reel to reel, and then I interviewed him for Tape Op, and then someone said, "Hey, it looks like you both are talking about, renting spaces and putting a studio together," so
mhm,
we ended up, going to have a meeting, and I was like, "Look, I wanna own the studio, I don't wanna partner, but do you wanna bring your stuff over, help me out
mhm,
building it, and we'll have a studio to work out of. We'll prorate it,"
mhm,
and so we did, and, strangely enough, I helped him record a song. I co-produced a song called "Miss Misery" that got onto the Good Will Hunting soundtrack and got
mhm.
nominated for an Oscar, and that's where you're just like, "What the fuck just happened?" That was a demo.
Uh-huh. Man. So what after all these years of,
Yeah,
listening to music that, that he made and that you
yeah.
were with him, um, are you able to put your finger on any, what is the appeal of Elliott Smith?
I think he I think he seriously just worked harder than most anybody else,
Hmm.
and I think he did it from a young age. So, what looks simple, deceptively simple in his hands is still more complex than someone trying to do a simulacrum of it, you know?
Mm.
I don't know how
Yeah,
many times people
like lots of rewriting and it
just
just
I mean, like, he would write I think the music part started to get easy, but the words, he would, take a cassette with him and then of an instrumental take of the song and just work on them and then come back and have it worked out,
mhm,
and I think just the buildup. I mean, just learning drums, learning piano, learning guitar, learning bass, learning how to write, when he was in high school, his high school band released like 5 cassettes or something,
wow.
like album length cassettes.
Uh-huh,
He really was just driven to do this, and driven more than anyone I've ever seen in my life, and
uh-huh,
he had a really strong, like you say, kinda like rewriting or refining,
mhm.
aesthetic,
Would
and,
you say he was a perfectionist?
no, no, I think that's always a misunderstanding that they say the same thing about Prince, and Prince was sloppy as fuck, in a way, like, he wanted to
Uh,
get the ideas out, he wanted to get
yeah,
the same with
yeah.
Elliott. I've talked to engineers like Susan Rogers who worked with Prince extensively,
Mm,
and everybody says they say Prince sounds like Elliott, the way
hmm,
he worked, not the music,
mm,
of course,
mhm,
but exactly the same, like, hole up in the studio, write as many songs as possible, record as much as possible, and just get the ideas out, and Elliott was not at all. I mean, there's this thing on Miss Misery where there's a really bad double, and I remember saying, "Do you wanna fix that?" And he goes, "No." And then I've seen people on, online forums saying like, "Engineer messed up," and I'm like, "Excuse me, the engineer actually said, 'Can you fix that?'" And he
mhm.
didn't,
Yeah,
so
you want to.
yeah, he didn't want it. He thought, "No,
And
this
he wanted to move
doesn't."
on. He wanted to keep going, it sounds like.
Yeah, I do these videos, instructional videos for LinkedIn Learning, formerly
Uh-huh.
lynda.com,
I
and
love learning.
my producer there is a guy named Todd Howard, who's become a really
Uh-huh.
good friend. And Todd said he worked with a producer years ago because one time I was doing my thing and I go, I could do that voiceover better. And
Mhm,
Todd goes, here's what I used to hear from my former producer. She
mhm.
said, what percentage better is it going to be? And then it makes you think like, well, all the information got across in my voiceover. It's not, I could say it better. I could say it more clearly, but nothing was not clear. you
Mhm.
know? And I think that's the same way that someone like Elliot would think. That's the way I think in the studio is like, it's not about perfecting something. It's about making sure what's important is getting heard,
Uh-huh, and
you
getting a
know?
feeling across, hopefully, too.
Yeah. Just making sure
Uh-huh,
it feels right. I mean, there's times, I like when I'm tracking people's vocals, I don't sit there and go, every single syllable note has to be perfect. I'm like, let's do it again. And then, okay, now let's just go back and do the bridge 6 times and let's talk about how the bridge feels and let's talk about the emotions and then let's sing it some more. And Okay,
Mhm.
that you see what I mean? And okay, let's take that word out and clean that section up, and it's all those things. It's about perfecting getting the info across, but
Uh-huh.
it's not about, perfect in sort of a weird sterilized
Yeah.
concept,
A and you wear many hats between Tape Op
Uh,
magazine, between, engineering, producing, running a
Yeah,
studio, and being
archivist,
archivist, doing things for LinkedIn Learning. And what is the class for LinkedIn
educating.
education?
Uh,
What's the LinkedIn Learning class that you're doing?
it's well, I have a series called Real Recording. Uh, oh wait, what is what's it called? Wait a minute.
Not about Mac
Real.
though.
I think it was called Real Recording Weekly. I haven't done one in quite a while because of COVID.
Uh-huh.
Um, and but I have like 12 hours of videos on there
Mhm.
that they can sign up to LinkedIn Learning. I think it's like $25 a month,
It's
and
an amazing platform. It's
yeah,
for
it's a lot of
learning a
stuff.
lot of different skills. It's really a great platform.
You can learn how to use Excel. You can learn everything on
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I've used it for Logic and
Yeah, yeah.
for, Ableton, and yeah, but I'll check out your class too, for
Yeah,
sure.
these are
Uh,
the thing I tried to get across on my courses were really just really more practical things, or things that I didn't think that were being taught that well or properly, if
mhm,
when people learn recording. So I tried
yeah,
to fill in the gaps kind of, and it's not so much like A to Z course, because I think those are kind of they're hard to digest.
they
But
are,
it's
yeah.
like, here's a little tidbit, here's a thing,
Uh-huh, that's great. I
those are
like
fun to
that's
do.
good for my tangential thought process. Uh,
Yeah. But yeah,
um,
I do a lot of different things, related in this field.
how do you juggle them? How do you balance them? Do you just make sure you're focused on one thing at a time, or what? Like, what's your approach?
Well, email is the biggest problem, because there's just so many emails to answer all the time. So
Mhm,
it's kind of like every morning is like an hour and a half of emails.
yeah,
But you know, I mean, I schedule myself, if I come down here, if I'm not being interviewed or interviewing someone else for tape op,
and I wanna
you
get to
know,
that in just a minute, yeah.
I have a plan. I have in my notes on my computer, I keep like list of what has to be mixed. I do a lot of remote mixing,
Uh-huh,
so I'll have a list of priority, what to start. And like I came down here, say the other day, I came down and I knew what I had to do. And there were some other things like, oh, I was supposed to reconcile some QuickBooks and things like that. Well, I can do that at home. So I kind of like, make sure that I'm prioritizing where I'm at with what I need to get done.
mhm,
Um, And, the magazine, I'll kinda just set aside time and be like, "This is the week I'm really gonna crank out the edit for the next issue," or something. And I really plan ahead, like, if I'm taking vacation time or something, I try to get things done early for the magazine so I can send it off to John for layout and stuff. So
mhm.
you have to be really methodical, and I think the number one thing about doing any of this stuff is you just gotta learn how to gracefully say no all the time,
I'm
I say
feeling that.
no. I Are you feeling that?
Yeah, I took a gig that I shouldn't have
Yeah,
taken, and
yeah,
I spent a lot of time, and realized that I just should not have done the gig, but I
yeah.
am learning, so, there's an upside, but yeah, I hear that big time.
I had a client recently. I've done a little bit of kind of archiving, not archiving work, but, archival mixing type work for somebody from stuff from the '70s, and then they came back around with more work, but then they had this really draconian NDA they wanted me to sign, and a
Mm,
bunch of other stuff that I had to sign. And I was like, this is too much. This is wigging me out. I'm just going to pass.
mhm,
And it probably kind of melted their brain a little bit, but
mhm,
it's also like, I've got plenty to do,
mhm,
like I just, there's a lot of sessions I won't take, tracking
mhm,
sessions sometimes if I don't if I don't see myself being fully invested and and digging into that and finding some joy in the process and being able to contribute and collaborate with the person, then I
mhm,
won't take it. I saw some email from someone and they were like, my manager, studio manager Kendra sent it by me, and the person said like, "We just want someone to track. We don't really need a lot of input, but we want to work with Larry." I'm like, "Well, then no, you don't get me. You
uh-huh.
know,
You're
I'm
like,
not
"That's not what I do."
I'm this place has been running for 25 goddamn years, and I've been making records since, like, 1985 or something.
And
It's like
why would they wanna hire you and not
just
get some wisdom from what you have to offer?
yeah, it's kinda rude, I don't wanna
Yeah,
be bossed around by a 22-year-old that has never made a record or something, and,
yeah.
I don't wanna sound crabby, but it's like, give me a break, like, hire me for I told one guy he was really wasting my time in the studio, and I sent him packing, and I said, "Look, I'm a resource. Like, if you hire me and all you're doing is tambourine overdubs and you're not listening to me, I don't wanna be here. Like,
Mhm.
I've got plenty of other things I can be doing that and they all contribute to my life and they all, make money. Like, I don't need the work so bad that I'll come and listen to this garbage, or
Yeah,
be
yeah.
treated like this." And, so you have to be kinda stern with people, They have to understand that it's not it is a service industry, but it's not just a service industry, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I found is it's one thing to be busy, but to make time for what you really wanna do is another thing, and to figure out
Yeah.
how to do that, and that's been a challenge for myself to figure out how do you leave space, but still get what you have to get done.
I stopped working weekends recently. Like,
Uh-huh,
I won't work on the magazine, I won't take studio gigs,
uh-huh.
and it's awesome.
Yeah,
I've never had weekends off.
then you come back with there's a more freshness being able to
Yeah.
rest, and yeah, so that's
I Yeah,
great.
I used to work, like, 60 days in a row. I mean, I used to work at the old Jackpot space. I would do, like, a 12-hour session, then I would edit the magazine for, like, 3 hours, and then I'd go home and sleep and come back and do it again,
Mhm.
day after day after day after day.
That's the expression, burning the candle at both ends. You can only do that
Yeah,
once.
and your
Yeah.
mental health suffers. I mean,
Mhm.
there were times I just had to do all that to get it all done and to make the slightest bit of a living,
Yeah.
you know, and now, the magazine's fairly stable and the studio's got we got a Kendra Lynn is an amazing studio manager who's worked with me off and on for, I don't even know, 15, 18 years.
Mhm.
Yeah, something like that. Jesus. So, you surround people like at the magazine. I don't do everything. I don't,
Mm.
they don't deliver pallets here and I hand address every issue,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know,
And
I
you had some
don't,
systems in place over the years where which
yeah,
certainly are
you have,
yeah.
you have a bunch of people to help make the magazine happen,
Mhm.
and it's like there's people selling ads and there's people working on layout and we have a CTO, we have an online publisher. We have a lot of people involved part time, almost
Uh-huh.
everybody, but they're all working on it all the time. So the same with the studio. There's a guy that helps clean up and do these awesome help out stuff around here. This guy Randy Darris
Mhm.
and we've got a staff of engineers who all know the place like the back of their hand, and we can just assign them to sessions
Mhm.
and we're open to freelancers that come in. So there's times where I don't have to come down here for a couple of weeks because people are booked up.
Mhm.
If the days are open, that's why I stopped working the weekends. Those are easy to book, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Other people can take those. And if
Yeah.
clients want me, I just say Monday through Friday, you know,
Yeah.
10 to 8. That's it.
That's great.
Yeah.
So back to the magazine and doing
Yeah.
interviews, as someone who is also into learning about people and doing interviews, I'm just curious, like, what are do you look at your interview having, like, a certain approach to interviews? Do you have, do you do extensive, research, or do you already know a ton about the person you're interviewing? Uh,
Sometimes I know a lot, yeah, like Chris Hillman or somebody like that. I'm like, "Okay, I'm a huge Birds fan, so,
uh,
like, this'll be fun." I was just looking at what's the last issue? Oh, like Danny Elfman, we
uh-huh,
both had worked with Elliott on Good Will Hunting, so it was like, "Alright,
uh-huh.
we got a good starting point here." But
Yeah,
then on that
and for
that
the people who maybe don't know Danny Elfman, you
oh,
you
you've
do,
heard him.
but you've heard him for sure, movies, The Simpsons, right?
Yeah, all kinds of yeah, The Simpsons theme, I mean, oh, tons of movie scores, all the Tim Burton movies and he's just constantly busy, and he's a singer, he was in Oingo Boingo in the
Mhm.
'80s, and, he's got a new album out too, it's really cool,
He
and
has a master class in that platform masterclass, and I
oh,
watched
yeah. I'll
And he
bet
talked
that's
about with
good.
The Simpsons how he did The Simpsons, and just the fact that he did that, and I don't think he said he was thinking about this, he, like he makes a ton more money every time that is played because
Oh,
his
because
voice
his oh my god. That's that story is in the Suzanne Ciani interview in this issue too, because
Uh-huh,
she got her voice onto some of the TV commercials she was doing. She was able to bill a ton more if
mhm,
she got her voice like through a vocoder and stuff onto these things because as the composer and stuff, you get a certain amount of money, but the union for voice would just pay a ton. So it's
yeah,
totally bizarre. But
it
yeah,
is.
I've the research, some things I research a lot. Sometimes I'll like in this same issue with Danny Elfman, I interviewed Kelsey Warren of Black Emoji. And
Mm,
I'd never heard Black Emoji till this album came out or was coming out. And I
mhm,
heard it and I'm like, "Oh, I really like this." And
mhm,
so I had to read other interviews with him and everything, and then we got on the phone and we had a great chat. But, it just goes back and forth on that, and sometimes I just have to learn about something, other times I'm kinda like, "Oh, this won't be hard." I kinda know where they're coming from,
uh-huh. So
so
do you have a list of questions? Or how do you approach it?
oh, questions for journalists are kinda bullshit. You for the kind of thing we do, like long form interviews, you
Mhm,
wanna have like a conversational vibe to it,
yeah,
and you can have starting points or topics that you kinda wanna bring in and remind people of maybe, but if you have really stiff questions, like, "Oh, on your 3rd album, doodly doodly do,
mhm,
you kinda did more of a world beat feel. Can you explain?"
mhm.
I mean, that's the worst question, it's like a curse that
Stop the flow, I
yeah,
guess.
it's like, ugh, and to ask a question, like, out of the blue and cut off somebody's thought that could have been elaborated on because you weren't listening, you were thinking about the next question. That's
Mhm,
another thing that, so, I mean, I've been interviewing people since before Tape-Op, for magazines and stuff going back to the mid-80s, and I've been interviewed a lot as a band member, as the Tape-Op guy, as the Elliott Smith guy, whatever the else, and so I try to keep them conversational, and I
mhm,
try to keep people on back on point if they're drifting,
mhm,
and I really try I because we're considered a technical magazine, I try to push against that and make it more about the philosophies behind things, the thoughts behind
mhm,
things, because it absolutely to me as an engineer, it does me absolutely no good to be like, "Okay, I'm gonna interview Danny Elfman, and I'm gonna say, 'What kind of mics do you like?'" Like, if that was a question I asked if I asked everyone the same questions kinda thing,
mhm.
that doesn't make any sense, you know?
Oh, do you find you have any questions that you come back to though, that just they just seem to be questions that you end up asking?
No. Does
Well,
it read that way?
no, 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 I was just curious. I mean, as someone who,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
relatively new to the interviewing,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
it's
how did you get your starts? The one question that probably is in every interview.
how did you get your start?
How'd
Yeah,
you get your start? Which could be the only question you need to ask with some people because 'cause they'll just go brrr, and tell you a bunch of stuff.
yeah,
But, I try to look for questions that somehow maybe the person hasn't been asked before because, you know, so I talked to someone the other day, she's thinking of writing a book on Elliott Smith, and I said, "God, I'm just tapped out. I've answered these questions 1,000 times.
mhm,
I'm telling the stories to the point where the stories seem more real than the reality,
mhm,
because I've said them over and over." And she's like, "I'm looking for new questions. I'm trying to fill in the gaps." And I'm like, "That sounds amazing. I'll do
mhm,
that. I'll do that interview."
uh-huh,
So
yeah,
I don't it'd be really hard. I've seen magazines where they seem to have like plate questions that they always ask the interviews, and I'm like, "Wow, that is just pathetic."
mhm.
I
Well, it
think
makes
that
sense to especially when you're saying long form, the conversation, I mean, yeah,
yeah,
people
you know,
want a conversation.
4,000 to 10,000 words, you know.
Yeah.
I
And
I
so
think
you're doing the interview and then you're editing out ums and all that, so you're
oh, yeah, I
recording it.
mean, I
Yeah.
rearrange them. I think of these as I rewrite my questions too. Like, I might if I was interviewing you, I might go, "Oh, blah, 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 talk about some shared experience," and yeah, 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 and then and then I'll edit it down to one line question,
Uh-huh.
and
For
keep
clarity.
myself out a little bit.
Mhm.
And I think that's important. I see interviews where people certainly don't do that, and people send me stuff to edit where they haven't done that. And
Yeah.
that's really, to me, that's really frustrating. It's like, we're not here to read about you. And there are times like, Danny Elfman and I talking about Elliott Smith. Well, we have to kind of introduce this concept that we both worked with him in different ways on the same record or
Yeah.
same soundtrack.
Uh-huh.
So, sure, there's a little more exposition, but a lot of people when they're being interviewed, they repeat themselves. You cut
Mhm.
those things out. You just find the most succinct version of that. You might take someone might come back to a concept at the end of the interview, and you're like, oh my god, that'd be great to plug back in at the top, where we were
Mhm.
discussing that earlier. And I might rearrange the structure. We might just start rambling about something and then get into like origin stories and stuff, and so maybe that
Mhm.
gets pushed to the top. It's really, the editing's important. And people, when you do it well, people, it's kind of like recording. People maybe don't know how much you did.
I was just
Yeah.
thinking that it's almost like arranging a song.
Yeah. Oh yeah. When if you listen, some of the interviews you can get on podcasts on our site too, and you can compare them, and you might be pretty shocked to see how different they are, but hopefully the gist of what's important is getting across. And sometimes I'll send the stuff back to the person that was interviewed, and everybody like, "Can I clarify some points?" And I'm like, "Certainly." Like, this
Mhm.
isn't about the idea of a verbatim interview is good for like court documents,
Mhm.
but it's not important here. It's like getting
Mhm.
the ideas across and the stories. If someone says the wrong name for a product or an album or something, we'll try to confirm that and put the right one in. I mean,
Uh-huh.
what is the point of making them look stupid?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it's really, there's a bit of an art to that for sure. And I think when you do it well, like I said, nobody notices and they just go, "Oh, that was a great conversation." And they think it's verbatim, but it's definitely not. You know.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate what you do with that magazine,
Thank
as
you.
far as because I am not technical at all. I mean, I'm not a recording engineer, but I still enjoy reading it and reading the interviews to hear, get little insights and hear stories.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. I think
so
that's a I think in the best way. I think right now we have a really horrible culture for music journalism.
mm,
If you look on one side, there's sort of a pitchfork, kind of snarky shitville, and then there's just like things that are just basically regurgitated press releases, and there's not much in between at
mhm,
this point in time. There's not. I wouldn't say that. I can't think of like a music magazine that I pick up and go, "This is fantastic."
mhm,
And there used to be some in the 80s and 90s and stuff. And so in a way, we're kind of filling in some gaps of like, let's
mhm,
really talk to the musicians, let's talk to the artists, let's talk to the producers, and talk about making art, and we're trying to do that more than we are like trying to be a how-to manual. I mean, we get those letters all the time from people saying, I really wish you would ask them some more technical questions about blah blah blah. It's like, number one, you've got the internet right now. Just Google it and look
mhm,
around and find a trusted source. Take some courses on LinkedIn Learning.
yeah,
Take a master class like you mentioned.
mhm,
Like go to a source. I mean, I do virtual recording workshops with people where I Zoom with them and I listen to their music and then we talk about how they're recording and working. And then, I give them all sorts of information to improve their craft. It's like there's resources out there, but it almost always is so much better if it's really applied one-on-one like that, like a mentorship. And that's
mhm,
how I learned. I would work with, amazing producers and engineers that would used to come in and work here, or I'd go to other studios and watch people work and go, well, I could be better. Look at this person.
mhm,
Yeah. And then I started interviewing the same people and I learned from them. So it's nobody's holding anyone back. It's usually the person that's asking the question that needs to find a better way to learn, you know?
mhm. Yeah, what better way to learn than firsthand from people who are masters
And
of what they do?
yeah, absolutely, man. I just the times I've been in the studio with people that were, way more advanced than me as far as recording engineers and just watched like someone like John Fishback who did songs in the key of life, like
Mm.
watching him work and I go, shit, I got a lot to learn.
Now I need to listen to that. For anyone who's not familiar with Stevie Wonder,
Yeah, he might have heard of Stevie Wonder.
Yeah, pretty well known singer.
So,
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time and talking
yeah,
with
thank
me.
you.
That's when I was researching tape op and what you do, some of the same reasons why I've started Clif Chats, are it seemed it resonated with me. So I'm glad that I could learn more about what you do. I
Yeah,
knew about you obviously as a recording engineer. Um, so anyway, I really appreciate it. And
thank you.
uh, thank you everybody for tuning in.
Yeah. Thanks. Where's my thumb? Thanks, everyone. It's
Um,
really weird. There's like a disconnect. It's like right, left.
it's not like
Yeah.
quite in sync.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's funny. I'm confused. Where am I?
Uh-huh.
Ah.